The friendship between Sultan Mahmud and Ayaz the Poor. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni was a powerful king, and like most rulers, he had many courtiers and companions. One of his companions was a poor man named Ayaz. Sultan Mahmud was very fond of Ayaz, and because of this, many of the other courtiers became jealous and started conspiring against him. One day, several ministers reported to Sultan Mahmud that Ayaz was a thief. Sultan Mahmud asked, "What's your evidence for accusing him of theft?" The ministers replied, "Well, Ayaz has a special room in his house that he guards very closely, making sure no one can see inside. Our guess is that he's hiding a lot of valuable jewels and treasures there." After hearing this, the Sultan, to clear up any doubts, decided to inspect Ayaz's special room. So, they all set off together to see it. When they arrived, the Sultan called for Ayaz. He ordered Ayaz to open the door. Ayaz, falling to his knees, begged the Sultan not to inspect the room and to spare him from revealing its secrets. But it was no use. The jealous ministers were sure that something incriminating would be found in the room, and that Ayaz would be finished. Ayaz had no choice but to open the door. The Sultan and his entourage entered, and to their surprise, the room was completely empty. There was nothing there except an old shirt, a worn-out coat, and a pair of torn shoes hanging on the wall. The Sultan was astonished and asked Ayaz about the meaning of these old clothes. Ayaz explained, "These are my clothes. When I was poor and first came here to serve you, whenever my pride or arrogance got the best of me, I would come to this room, put on these clothes, and remind myself, Ayaz, you were once the person who wore these." Hearing this, Sultan Mahmud couldn't help but embrace him, and the jealous ministers were even more embarrassed. Time passed, and once again, many ministers started complaining about how the Sultan paid so much attention to Ayaz. Sultan Mahmud decided to show them why he favored Ayaz. One early morning, with a mysterious smile on his face, Sultan Mahmud entered the council room where the ministers were gathered. As usual, they all stood up in respect and bowed. Sultan Mahmud invited them to sit and then took his place on the throne, holding a small box, beautifully decorated with intricate paintings. Everyone looked at the box, sensing that something important was inside. The Sultan addressed the ministers, "What do you think is inside this box?" They all replied, "The Sultan knows best." With great care, the Sultan opened the box. Inside was a dazzling diamond that caught everyone's eye. No one had ever seen such a large diamond before. The Sultan called for his vizier and handed him the diamond. "How much do you think this diamond is worth?" the Sultan asked. The vizier, mesmerized by its beauty, said, "I don't think anyone can put a price on it. Its value is greater than the entire royal treasury." The Sultan smiled and said, "Now, I command you to break this diamond." The vizier was shocked. "Break the diamond, Your Majesty." "No, no, Sultan. That would be a huge betrayal. This diamond should stay in the treasury to back the kingdom." "Well done, my wise vizier," said Sultan Mahmud, nodding in approval. He reached into his pocket, took out a small bag of gold coins, and gave it to the vizier as a reward for his prudence. Then, Sultan Mahmud called another minister and handed him the diamond. "Do you know how much this jewel is worth?" he asked. The minister replied, "It's extremely valuable, Your Majesty." Sultan Mahmud said, "Then I command you to break it." The minister, mimicking the vizier, said, "Would never betray you, Your Majesty. This diamond belongs in the royal treasury." "Very well," the Sultan said with a smile. He gave the minister a bag of gold coins as a reward for his wisdom. Sultan Mahmud repeated this with several more ministers. One by one, they all refused to break the diamond, each praising its worth and stating that it should stay in the royal treasury. For each minister, the Sultan rewarded them with gold coins. Then, Sultan Mahmud called Ayaz, his personal servant, a young man with a lean frame, wheat-colored skin, and blue eyes, whom the Sultan deeply admired for his good character. Ayaz stepped forward and bowed before the Sultan. The Sultan handed Ayaz the diamond and asked, "Ayaz, how much do you think this diamond is worth?" Ayaz replied, I believe it's worth more than the entire royal treasury. Now, I command you to break it, the Sultan said. Without hesitation, Ayaz placed the diamond on the ground and, pulling a stone from his pocket, smashed the diamond into several pieces. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by a loud murmur. The ministers began scolding Ayaz, accusing him of wasting such a precious jewel. They all shouted, "How could you destroy such a priceless gem?" Sultan Mahmud's voice echoed through the room, "Ayaz, you know how valuable this diamond is. Why did you break it?" Ayaz replied, "Your Majesty, as valuable as this diamond is, it's not more valuable than your command. Your command is a far greater treasure." Sultan Mahmud looked at the ministers with an angry gaze. The ministers understood the king's disapproval and fell silent, realizing the mistake they had made. Each one secretly wished they had understood the Sultan's intentions and broken the diamond. But it was too late. Sultan Mahmud's voice rang out, "Bring the executioner. Cut off the heads of these disobedient flatterers. None of you understand as much as this servant does." Soon, the executioner entered with his terrifying axe, and the ministers turned pale with fear. Sultan Mahmud was so angry that no one dared speak or even apologize. At that moment, Ayaz stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, these men meant no harm. You know that well. Please spare their lives." Sultan Mahmud took a deep breath and said, "How can I deny your request?" He then gestured for the executioner to leave the room and stood up from his throne, leaving the council in frustration. The lesson from this story, as told by Rumi, is that when a person receives the blessings of God, they should not forget their humble beginnings or become arrogant. A true servant of God should always remember their place and be mindful of God's commands. Thank you for reading until the end. We appreciate your support. Stay tuned for more stories and don't forget to like and share with your friends.